15-year-old Helen Gory lived with her mother Sheila and brother Jamie on an estate in Hordine, Hampshire. She attended the Poor Brook Park School. She was in her last year. Sheila, her mother, described her daughter as a typical teenager who loved music, clothes, spending time with her friends, and she also loved spending time with babies and children. She really wanted to be a nanny when she left school. Her mother described her as bubbly and having a great sense of humour.
She was a typical teenager, typical 15-year-old. She loved her music, loved dancing, adored babies and babies adored her. Very bubbly. She had a great sense of humour and personality that everybody loved. I don't think she had an enemy in the world.
There was a local community centre only 10 minutes away from the house, and every night there would be some kind of social event for all ages. There would always be something to do, a friend to meet, someone to meet up with.
10 minutes walk away from the house is the local community centre, Merchiston Hall, where on a Friday night there are all kinds of social activities.
Didn't you, dear? Should have mentioned hands off as well.
Hordine Amateur Theatrical Society were rehearsing a play there that evening.
And that evening the Theatrical Society was doing an evening at the centre, and it wasn't unusual for Helen to go out late at night to see friends. She was very sociable and she liked being out and about. Her mother said she was well liked and did not have an enemy in the world. This case begins on the night of Friday the 31st of July 1992. Helen had spent the majority of the evening at home with her brother Jamie.
What are you making?
Cheese sandwich.
What?
Take your own.
Fine. Got some cornflakes?
No thanks.
By 11:30 p.m, Helen told her brother that she was going to bed, but only minutes later she came running back downstairs, leaving the house. Her brother asked her where she was going, but all she said was that she'd only be a few minutes and wouldn't be long. As Helen was getting ready for bed and putting on her night clothes, she'd gone out of the house with her all-in-one nightdress beneath her clothing. Her family said it was not unusual for her to go out late at night. A lot of her friends lived nearby, and sometimes they called for her, or she might occasionally look out of the window and see one of them and go down to meet them. She would normally be home around 1 a.m, but the following morning Helen had not returned home, and police were called to the grounds of Merchiston Hall, where a body had been found. The body had been left out in plain view on a footpath 100 yards behind the hall by wedding guests using the facility. The young girl had been strangled with her own clothing, and police believe she may have died around 12:30 a.m. Helen had been left half naked, indicating the murder was sex motivated, although there was no evidence of sex assault. Police said that the fact that her clothing had been interfered with did indicate a motive in that way. The forensic investigator said that they felt she had been murdered on the spot where she was found. Mrs. Gory said that she looked in Helen's bedroom on the Saturday morning before going to work, and it did appear that she was in bed, or it looked like it. But when I came home on Saturday night, Jamie said Helen was still not back, and when I got up Sunday morning, she wasn't in. Then one of the lads said that there had been a girl found murdered, and not long after that, her mother got in touch with the police and said, "I understand that a girl has been found. My daughter is missing." It was not long after this, forensics were able to establish that this was the body of Helen Gory. Helen's murder made headline news nationally. She was on the front pages of all the newspapers and on the news channels. At an emotional news conference, Helen Gory's mother broke down as she described how her daughter was a lovable girl with a zest for life. Several witnesses came forward to report a girl matching Helen's description near the hall that evening. 2 independent witnesses had reported seeing a girl who looked like Helen waiting at a bus stop by the Portsmouth Road at the junction of Catherington Lane.
The main road runs past Merchiston Hall. At about 10 to midnight, 20 minutes after Helen left home, a local man saw a girl fitting Helen's description standing in a bus shelter on the Portsmouth Road. At the same time, a car, possibly an escort, came up from Catherington Lane. A passing motorist, Patricia Longier, also saw the girl getting into the car.
And then getting into a car that may have been a Ford Escort. At around midnight, a woman driving along Portsmouth Road saw a man come out of the bushes on the side of the road, and he appeared to not want anyone to see his face, and he turned away.
At around midnight, Sheila Good was driving past the hall along the Portsmouth Road.
As I was driving along, a man came out of the bushes. Got the impression that he didn't want me to see his face.
At 12:30 a.m, a man driving down the same stretch of road saw two men standing several yards apart, but the driver got the impression that they were together. He said that one of the men looked suspicious and seemed to be worried about people spotting him. Police believe it may have been around the time Helen had been killed. Helen's case featured on the influential Crime Watch programme 3 months after her murder in October. It was also revealed that an unidentified man who had gone into the one-stop supermarket on Catherington Lane on the 3rd told the cashier that he had seen Helen on the road at around 12:30 a.m. that night.
I saw her on the Friday night, past me on the street on the corner. It was about 12:30. And I thought, you silly girl, you're only about 15. What are you doing out so late?
You've been to the police?
Oh no.
You ought to.
Yeah, I might.
Anything helps. As soon as I mentioned the police, it was a bit shaky.
The time police believed she may have been killed. When the cashier asked if he had told the police this information, he began acting strangely and left quickly, saying he hadn't. The cashier commenting, all he really wanted to do was just get away from me. And as police were continuing with their investigation, they decided to do a search of Helen's bedroom to see if there was anything in there that could establish who she was meeting that night. They discovered two interesting pieces of information. Firstly, Helen had a diary, and the night before she had written an insert regarding John Corcoran. John phoned me up, the one I met last night. He wants me to go for a drive with him and his friends. But who was John? He had a car, so he must have been a little bit older than she was. But who was he? And then as they searched further, they found a business card with his number, with his name and telephone number on it. John Corcoran. Great, they're getting somewhere, they thought. John was unemployed. He was 21 years of age and lived in Warren Park, Havant. Police showed up at his house, noticing the beat-up old Ford Escort on the driveway. They took him to the police station where they questioned him about Helen's murder. Not only did Helen mention him in her diary, she had one of his business cards, he had offered to take her out on a drive, and he had a car that matched the description of one seen that night. But not only that, he had large scratches up and down one of his arms. But despite all this evidence, John still refused to admit any responsibility for the murder. John Corcoran was arrested on charges relating to the crime. Police believe that Helen had met John Corcoran the night before she died as he cruised the streets of Horndean in his battered out old Ford Escort. He was known to cruise around the area in his vehicle, looking for young girls to hand business cards to and seek sex from. It was discovered that Helen had written in her diary before she had left on that night saying, John phoned me, the one I had met last night. He wants me to go for a drive with him and his friends. On the night Helen went out, John had again been driving aimlessly around Horndean with friends. His friends said that he left them for around 40 minutes, saying he had to go and meet someone. He was said to prey on young girls, and police believed he tried to force himself on Helen, and when she resisted, he strangled and smothered her with her own clothing. Although he had already been a suspect in Helen's murder and been spoken to by police, Helen's sister would later recount how John had attempted to flirt with her and ask her on a date while having an affair with one of her friends, with her sister saying, I couldn't believe it when he tried it on with me, I was disgusted. She added that it was known he was interested in kinky sex, and not long after police released that he had been arrested for the vicious murder, another 14-year-old girl came forward to speak on how he'd raped her. It was heard that the scratches on his arm had come from Helen as she fought for her life using her nails, as supported by the fact that two of her fake fingernails had come off at the scene and DNA evidence had been recovered. A witness who had previously given John an alibi for that night came forward to tell them that he had lied and he had not been with John the whole night. In the early stages of the trial, it had been reported that DNA evidence which linked John to the murder scene would be part of the prosecution's case. It had been reported that investigators had identified DNA from material under Helen's broken fingernails and clothing, but the evidence was not used at trial. John of Plumpley Walk in Havant stood trial the RAPE and murder of Helen. He was also charged with the RAPE of another 14-year-old girl. The lead detective, Colin Smith, reacted by saying, "Helen was popular, lively but vulnerable adolescent who was killed by a nasty and vicious man who preyed on young girls." John Corcoran was sentenced to a whole life order, and at sentencing the judge told him, "There is no doubt in my mind that you have a very strong streak of arrogance in your character. On the night in question in 1992, you were determined to have sex with a 15-year-old girl, whether she liked it or not. She buffed and resisted you, and you strangled her." In January 2003, John Corcoran had his conviction for murder overturned at the Court of Appeals. The grounds were that the judge had misdirected the jury in his summing up of the case. After he was released, John moved back to his home in Plumpley Walk, Warren Park, Havant. After his release, the police said that they had no plans to reopen the investigation and they were not looking for anyone else in this case. What do you think about this case? The fact that it was overturned and he was able to just go back to his normal life. The fact that the Gory family are now missing their daughter and are living a life sentence of their own, while he just goes back to living his life. Do you believe that he was the person responsible for this crime? Do you believe that this should have been overturned or not? I'd be interested to know what you think about this case in the comment section below, and I'll be back with you again soon. Bye for now.